I have always been proud that I built this house with my own hands. Every nail, every board, everything passed through my hands. Now that I'm 74, I'm not the strong man I used to be, able to work 16 hours straight. A stroke 3 months ago really knocked me down. My left arm still doesn't work right, and I walk with a shuffle, as if I'm apologizing to the floor for every step I take. My name is Garland Hayward, and I have worked as a civil engineer all my life. When I was young, I built 3 houses, one for my wife Clarissa and me, one to rent out so we would have something to live on in our old age, and one, the smallest, which I always planned to leave to my youngest son. Clarissa died 5 years ago, taking the best part of me with her. Cancer spares even the kindest. After her death, I sold our main house, too many memories, and moved into the one I had built to rent out. Life became quieter, but it didn't stop. Before my stroke, I worked as a consultant for a small construction company, played poker with friends 3 times a week, and spent my weekends in the garden. It was the ordinary life of an ordinary widower in El Paso, Texas. My relationships with my children varied. My eldest daughter, Marielle, and I stopped communicating after Clarissa's death. Something broke between us when she couldn't come to the funeral. Urgent business in Portland, as she explained. Maybe I was too harsh at the time, or maybe she turned her back on her family too easily. My relationship with my younger son, Carson, remained functional. We talked on the phone once a month or so and exchanged gifts at Christmas. I knew he worked as an accountant for a construction company. Ironic, considering how much he always despised my manual labor. His wife, Lauren, always struck me as overly uptight, and their 2 children, my grandchildren, whom I hardly knew, usually looked at me like I was some strange museum exhibit. 6 years ago, when Carson turned 37, I gave him that 3rd house. I remember Clarissa arguing with me. "Garland, he didn't even thank you for last year's birthday check. What makes you think he'll appreciate a house?" But I was sure that such a gift would change our relationship. Every man should have his own house, and Carson and Lauren were still paying off the mortgage on their apartment in the city center. Carson accepted the house without much enthusiasm. "It's a long way from the center," he said, looking around the sturdy 2-story building, "and it needs repairs." Clarissa was silent all the way home, saying only at the doorstep, "He's always been like that, Garland. It won't change." I had a stroke in the garden. I was trimming the rose bushes when suddenly the world tilted and I fell face down on the soft ground. Luckily, a neighbor saw me fall over the fence and called an ambulance. 3 weeks in the hospital, then a rehabilitation center where slowly, day after day, I learned to use my left hand again. When it came time to be discharged, the doctor said I would need supervision at first. "Do you have anyone who can help you?" he asked, looking over his glasses. I had a choice: hire a caregiver or turn to my son. Professional pride prevented me from admitting that my own son would hardly want to help, so I lied. "Of course, my son will help." That evening, I called Carson. After several rings, he answered in an irritated voice, "Yes, Dad, I'm a little busy right now. What's going on?" I explained the situation. There was a long pause, then a heavy sigh. "Dad, we don't live in a rubber house. Although, wait, you live alone in your house now, right? Maybe you should hire a caregiver?" I felt my throat tighten. "The doctor said it would be better for me to be with my family, just for the first while. I can pay for groceries and—" No, he interrupted me. "That's not what I mean. It's just that Lauren is allergic to cats, and you have 2. I can leave them with my neighbor Edna. She loves animals," I said quickly, not wanting to lose my last hope. Another pause. "Okay," he finally said. "But this is temporary, Dad. Very temporary." So I found myself in the house I had built and given to my son. The room on the first floor, the one I had planned as a study, became my bedroom. Carson moved the old bed from the guest room and put a bedside table next to it. "Here, Make yourself comfortable, he said, as if he were doing me a favor in my own former home. The first few days passed in tense silence. Lauren cooked in silence, and the children, Ashley, 12, and Bryce, 10, looked at me with ill-concealed irritation, as if I were an obstacle between them and the television. Carson came home late, said a quick hello, and went to his study on the second floor. On the fourth day, I tried to make breakfast for everyone. With clumsy movements, I cracked the eggs, cut the bacon, and made toast. When the family came down to the table, Lauren looked at my efforts and pursed her lips. "Garland, that's very nice of you, but the kids don't eat fried food. Ashley's on a diet and Bryce is gluten intolerant." Carson quickly grabbed a piece of bacon. "I'll eat it, Dad, but next time maybe just ask what to make." I nodded, feeling like a useless old man. Of course I'm sorry. The days dragged on. I tried to take up as little space as possible, helped with the dishes, tried to fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom. Once I offered to work in the garden. There was a small plot behind the house that was overgrown with weeds. "No, Dad," Carson waved me away. "You're still too weak for that kind of work." "I could just weed." I said no. His voice became sharp. "We're going to make a barbecue area there, so we don't need a garden." In the evenings, I sat in my room watching old movies on the small laptop I had brought with me. Sometimes I called my friend Terrence, but I tried to keep my voice down so as not to disturb the owners of the house. The tension grew gradually. At first it was little things. Lauren putting the cup I had just drunk coffee from away in the cupboard, as if afraid I would spill it. Carson sighing irritably when I took too long in the bathroom, the children stopping talking when I entered the room. In the second week, the first serious conflict arose. I was watching the news in the living room when Ashley and Bryce came in. "Grandpa, we want to watch our show," Ashley said emphatically. "Of course," I said, reaching for the remote. "What do you want to watch?" "Just give us the remote." Bryce snatched it out of my hands. "Bryce," I said gently, "that's not how you do it. You have to ask nicely." The boy rolled his eyes. "Mom, Grandpa's lecturing us again." Lauren appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. "What's going on?" "Grandpa won't let us watch TV," Ashley lied. I started, but Lauren cut me off. "Garland, the kids have a right to watch TV in their own home. If you want to watch the news, you can watch it on your laptop." I got up silently and went to my room, feeling like an unwelcome guest. The climax came 18 days after I moved in. Carson came home earlier than usual that evening, unusually agitated. He walked straight into my room without even knocking. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, sitting down on the edge of my bed without asking permission. "Of course, son. What's the matter?" I put down the book I was reading. Carson ran his hand through his hair and a crease appeared on his forehead that I remembered from his childhood. It always meant he was about to say something unpleasant. "Dad, you've been living with us for almost 3 weeks now." "Yes, and I'm very grateful for—" "Let me finish," he interrupted. "Lorraine and I have been talking. You're feeling much better and we're spending extra money on you. Electricity, water, food. Not to mention that Ashley had to give up her TV." I looked at him in confusion. "Son, but I offered to pay for groceries and I never asked for any TVs." "It's not about the money, Dad. It's about fairness. We decided that if you're staying, you should pay rent." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Rent? For a room in the house I gave you?" Carson shrugged. "Exactly. You gave it to me. Now it's my house. And if you want to live in it, then please pay like everyone else." I stared at him, unable to believe my ears. My son, the boy I had taught to hammer nails and ride a bike, was now demanding money from me for a roof over his head. "How much?" I asked quietly. $2,500 a month, he replied, without a hint of embarrassment. "That's less than you'd pay for a nursing home, and more than just a room, because Lauren cooks for you." I slowly stood up. My left hand was shaking, but not from weakness, from anger. "Are you serious, Carson?" "Absolutely," he said, standing up as well. "And starting today. We expect the first payment in a week." I walked silently past him toward the door. "Dad, where are you going? We're not done talking." His voice became sharp. I turned around in the doorway. "I need some air." "Don't act like you're offended," he shouted after me as I walked through the living room toward the exit. "I'm not going to support an old man for free, even if you are my father." Lauren stood by the stairs with a look of poorly concealed satisfaction on her face. The children peered around the corner with undisguised curiosity. I stepped out onto the porch, closed the door behind me, and took a deep breath of the El Paso evening air. Behind me, I heard Carson's voice as he threw open the door. "You're going to pay me $2,500 a month, or find yourself another job." I didn't turn around. I slowly descended the steps and walked down the sidewalk, not knowing where I was going. Clarissa's words echoed in my head. "He's always been like that, Garland. It won't change." But now something had to change. I didn't know what yet, but I felt it was time to end this chapter of my life. I wandered the streets of El Paso until my legs ached with fatigue. The evening desert air, usually soothing, felt heavy tonight. Each breath was difficult, as if I were breathing not air, but a heavy, viscous substance of disappointment. Carson's words rang in my ears. $2,500 a month, for the right to live in a house I had built with my own hands. I don't remember how I got to the bus stop. An elderly woman with heavy bags looked at me with concern. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked with a slight Mexican accent. I shook my head, unable to speak. She moved over anyway, making room for me on the bench. "My name is Estella," she said simply. "Sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger than to your own family." That phrase opened something inside me, and the words poured out. I told her about my son, about my house, about the demand for rent. She listened without interrupting, only shaking her head occasionally. "When my children were little," she said when I finished, "I worked 2 jobs so they could go to school. Now they have their own homes, their own families. They call on my birthday and at Christmas. Sometimes I think, maybe I gave too much. Maybe I should have taught them to give too." The bus arrived. She got up with difficulty, gathering her bags. "Don't let them take your dignity, senor. It's the only thing we have left when we get old." I watched her struggle to get on the bus and suddenly felt that my problems weren't the end of the world. There's always a way out. You just have to find it. I hailed a taxi and returned to my home, the one I had lived in before my stroke. It took me a while to find the spare key I always kept under a rock behind the garden tools. My hands were shaking as I opened the door. The house greeted me with musty air and silence. 3 months of absence had turned it into a strange place. I turned on the lights and slowly walked into the living room. Clarissa's photos on the walls, our books on the shelves, her favorite armchair by the window. Everything was as it had been, but it seemed like a stage set hiding emptiness. I sank into the chair and allowed myself a few minutes of complete, deafening silence. Then I got up and headed for my study. It was time to act. My study had always been the most organized place in the house. Clarissa used to laugh and say it was compensation for my usual creative mess on construction sites. Every document was filed in folders, each folder labeled in her neat handwriting. I took out a box labeled Real Estate and began methodically going through the documents. The deed to this house, Clarissa's will, insurance policies, documents for the house I was renting out, and finally, a folder labeled Carson House. Opening it, I saw a draft of the deed I had drawn up myself, preliminary documents from the notary, and nothing else. No final deed of gift, no documents transferring ownership. I checked again. Maybe I had put it in another folder? But no, everything was in its place. Then I turned on the computer, an old but reliable desktop that Clarissa and I had bought back in 2015. I opened my email and started looking for correspondence with the notary. There were letters, but the last one was dated the day I gave Carson the keys. The notary wrote that he was waiting for my son to contact him to complete the procedure. I leaned back in my chair, stunned by the discovery. The house where Carson lived with his family technically still belonged to me. He had never completed the gift deed. Why? The answer came almost immediately when I remembered the notary's words. Mr. Hayward Jr. will be liable for gift tax, given the value of the property. Carson, who had always avoided unnecessary expenses, had probably decided to put it off and then simply forgotten or deliberately ignored it. I reached for the phone and dialed the number of my old friend Terrence Wickham. We had met in the 70s while working together on the construction of the Rio Grande Bridge. Since then, he had become a real estate lawyer, and our friendship had only grown stronger over the years. "Garland, my friend." His loud voice always sounded like he was speaking through a megaphone. "I heard about your stroke. I was going to visit, but I was told you were at your son's place." "Terrence," I said, barely containing my excitement, "I need your help, professional help." I briefly explained the situation. As I spoke, his exclamations became more and more colorful. Terrence was never one to mince words. "That ungrateful," he cursed so loudly that I could almost see the walls of my office redden. "I'm sorry, Garland, but your son has always been a spoiled egoist. Remember how he refused to help you fix the roof because he might ruin his manicure?" I sighed. "It's not about who he is, Terrence. Just tell me, am I right? Is the house still mine?" "If the paperwork wasn't done properly, then yes, the house is legally yours. But let's check to be sure. Can I stop by tomorrow morning?" The next morning, Terrence showed up at my door at 9 sharp with coffee and donuts. Despite his 76 years, he looked alert and trim. Years in the courtroom had taught him to stand up straight. We spent several hours reviewing documents and making phone calls. Terrence contacted the county archives, checked property records and tax returns. The more we learned, the clearer the picture became. "Garland," Terrence finally said, taking off his reading glasses, "the house is still officially yours. Carson pays the utilities and property taxes, but you're still the owner on all the documents." I stared silently at the papers spread out before us. Thoughts swirled in my head like disturbed bees. Part of me felt relieved. I had leverage. Another part felt deep sadness. My own son had taken advantage of my generosity all these years without even bothering to complete the gift legally. "What now?" I asked, not so much of Terrence as of myself. Terrence leaned back in his chair and looked at me intently. "That's up to you, old man. Legally, you have several options. You can formally complete the gift, despite his behavior. You can demand that he pay you the market value of the house, or I can evict him," I finished for him. "Yes," Terrence nodded. "As the owner, you have the right to file an eviction notice. Given the circumstances, the court would most likely be on your side." I stood up and walked over to the window. Through the glass, I could see my neglected garden. The roses Clarissa loved so much were almost dead from lack of water, just like my relationship with my son. "You know," I said slowly, still looking at the garden, "when Carson was 7, he fell off his bike and hurt his knee badly. I carried him home, and all he kept saying was, 'Dad, don't leave me, please.' And now he's demanding rent from me." Terrence was silent, giving me time to collect my thoughts. "I'm going to evict him," I finally said, turning to my friend. "Not out of revenge, but because it's time he learned that his actions have consequences." Terrence nodded. "I thought so. When do you want to start the process?" "Right now, but I need to get my things out of my house." "I'll go with you," Terrence said, standing up decisively, "in case he decides to make a scene." We arrived at Carson's house about an hour later. I was silent the whole way, lost in my thoughts. What would I say to my son? How would I explain my actions? Was there even any point in explaining? Fortunately, no one was home. I used my key, the one I had once ceremoniously given to Carson and then taken back just in case, and quickly gathered my things: clothes, medicine, the book I was reading, and the photo of Clarissa that I always carried with me. As we were leaving, I noticed an envelope on the kitchen table with "Dad" written on it. Inside was a note from Carson. "I understand you're upset, but my offer still stands. $2,500 a month is a fair price for room, board, and help. Think about it. Carson." I showed the note to Terrence. He shook his head. "He really doesn't get it, does he?" "No," I replied, carefully folding the note back into the envelope. And he never did. On the way back, Terrence suggested we stop by his house to discuss our next steps. His wife, Myrna, a plump woman with the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, greeted us with homemade lemonade and sympathetic looks. They lived in a small but cozy house in an old part of El Paso. "So," Terrence said when we settled down in his backyard under an old oak tree, "we need a plan. Eviction is a formal process, but it can be unpleasant. Especially when you're evicting your own son," Myrna added, setting a plate of sandwiches in front of us. I nodded, feeling my heart tighten. "I'm still not sure I'm doing the right thing." "Garland," Terrence put his hand on my shoulder, "I've known you for almost 50 years. You've always been a fair man. Too soft at times, especially with Carson, but fair. He crossed the line, demanding money from his own father to live in a house that still technically belongs to his father. That's beyond the pale." I sighed. "You're right. But how do I do this, right?" We spent the next 2 hours working out a plan. Terrence, with his legal experience, explained every step of the eviction process. First, a formal notice specifying the date by which the premises must be vacated. Then, if Carson refused, filing an eviction lawsuit, a possible court hearing, where I would have to explain the situation to the judge. "The most important thing," Terrence emphasized, "is to stay calm. Don't let him provoke you into an emotional reaction. Remember, the law is on your side." Myrna, who had been listening silently to our conversation, suddenly said, "What happens after that? After the eviction?" The question caught me off guard. I was so focused on the eviction itself that I hadn't thought about what would happen next. I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Maybe I'll sell the house." "What about Carson?" she asked gently. "Are you prepared for this to destroy your relationship completely?" I looked at my hands, the hands that had built a home for my son, who was now demanding money from me to live in it. "Myrna, I think our relationship was destroyed the moment he decided he could take advantage of my weakness after my stroke. Maybe it was destroyed long before that, but I didn't want to see it." Terrence rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You know, Garland, maybe you should get in touch with Marielle. I know you haven't spoken in years, but—" "No," I replied sharply. "After she didn't come to Clarissa's funeral, I just know." Myrna and Terrence exchanged glances but didn't press the issue. Instead, we returned to discussing the eviction plan. By evening, we had a clear plan of action. Terrence would prepare all the necessary documents. In 2 days, we would go together to Carson's house to deliver the eviction notice. If he refused to vacate the premises voluntarily within the specified period, 30 days, we would file a formal lawsuit. "You can stay with us until things settle down," Myrna offered as I was leaving. I thanked her but declined. My house, even if it was empty, was still my home. Besides, I needed some time alone to make a final decision that could change my life and my son's life forever. When I got home, I sat in Clarissa's chair for a long time, staring at her photo. "What would you do, dear?" I asked silently. Of course, there was no answer, but for some reason I was sure she would approve of my decision. Clarissa always said, "Being a parent doesn't mean letting your children walk all over you." I spent the next day tidying up the house and thinking about the future. In the evening, Terrence called. "Everything's ready," he said. "The documents are prepared. I've talked to Sheriff Morales. Remember him? We bowled together in the 90s. He'll accompany us to avoid any problems. The sheriff? Do you think that's necessary? I felt a twinge of anxiety. Just a precaution, Garland. Carson might react, unpredictably. I knew Terrence was right. My son had always had a hard time accepting what he considered unfair treatment. Even as a child, his tantrums were legendary. Okay, I agreed. When? Tomorrow at 10 in the morning. I'll pick you up. After the call, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Memories of Carson as a child mingled with images of him as an adult demanding rent from me. Somewhere between those 2 points, we lost each other. Maybe I was too soft on him, or, on the contrary, too strict. Clarissa always said I was inconsistent. Sometimes I let him do whatever he wanted and then suddenly demanded discipline. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of Clarissa. She was standing in the garden surrounded by her favorite roses, smiling that special smile that always meant, "You can do it, Garland. You always do." In the morning, I woke up with remarkable clarity in my head. I knew I was doing the right thing, not out of revenge or resentment, but because sometimes you have to tear something down to rebuild it. I had been a builder my whole life. I knew that better than anyone. At exactly 10 o'clock, Terrence appeared at my doorstep, dressed in a formal suit as if he were going to court. "Ready?" he asked, handing me a folder of documents. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. "Ready as I'll ever be." We were silent on the way to Carson's house. Terrence drove intently, and I looked out the window at the familiar streets of El Paso. Sheriff Morales followed us in his patrol car. We had agreed to meet at the house, but he insisted on escorting us when Terrence explained the situation. "Are you nervous?" Terrence asked as we turned onto the street where the house stood. "Strange, but no," I replied. "I feel certain. You know how it is before a difficult stage of construction. You've planned everything, the materials are ready, and all that's left is to act." Terrence smiled. "I've always envied your approach, Garland. For me, legal battles are like chess. For you, life is just another construction project." "It hasn't always helped," I said, looking at the approaching house. "Sometimes I got so caught up in building the future that I didn't notice the foundation cracking at the seams." We parked in front of the house. Carson's car was in the driveway, which meant he was home. He was usually at work at this time of day, but apparently he had decided to stay home today. Maybe he was waiting for me to return with the money. Sheriff Morales pulled up behind us and got out of his car. He was a tall Mexican man with piercing eyes and a neatly trimmed mustache touched by gray. We had met several times at town events, and I had always respected his calm confidence. "Mr. Hayward," he shook my hand. "I hope my presence won't be necessary, but I'm here to make sure everything goes according to the law." I nodded, grateful for his tact. "Thank you, Sheriff. I also hope everything goes civilly." The 3 of us walked to the door and I rang the bell. It was a strange feeling, ringing the doorbell of my own home. A few seconds later, the door opened and Carson appeared in his pajamas. His gaze slid over me, lingered on Terrence, and then settled anxiously on Sheriff Morales. "Dad?" His voice sounded confused. "What's going on? Why are you with the sheriff?" "Hello, Carson," I said, trying to sound calm. "We need to talk. Can we come in?" He stepped aside to let us in. In the living room, the TV was tuned to a sports channel, and there was a half-empty cup of coffee on the coffee table. "Carson, who's that?" Lauren appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. When she saw us, she froze. "What's going on?" "I'd like to know that myself." Carson crossed his arms over his chest. "Dad, if this is about the rent, we can discuss the amount. Maybe $2,200? Terrence made a sound like a snort, but I stopped him with a gesture. "Carson, this isn't a negotiation about the rent. I'm here to formally notify you of your eviction." I pulled a document out of the folder and handed it to him. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises." Carson's face went through a whole range of emotions, from bewilderment to shock to anger. "Are you out of your mind?" He didn't even take the document. You can't evict me. This is my home. You gave it to me yourself. Terrence stepped forward. Actually, Mr. Hayward Jr., the house is still your father's property. You never completed the legal transfer. The title is still in his name. Carson turned pale. He looked at me, then at Terrence, then at the sheriff, as if hoping one of them would say it was a joke. This is some kind of mistake, he finally managed. I remember signing papers. Preliminary, I sighed. You were supposed to meet with a notary to complete the process and pay the gift tax. You never did. And now you're using a legal loophole to throw us out on the street? Lauren stepped up and stood next to her husband. That's despicable, even for you, Garland. I felt anger rising inside me, but I suppressed it. No, Lauren. It's despicable to demand rent from your father for living in a house he built with his own hands and wanted to give you out of love. It's despicable to take advantage of his weakness after his stroke to get money out of him. We took care of you, Carson shouted. We fed you, gave you a room. 18 days, Carson. I shook my head. 18 days after 50 years of me taking care of you. And you think you have the right to demand $2,500 a month from me. Lauren turned to Carson, suspicion flashing in her eyes. You demanded rent from my father. You said you offered to let him pay for part of the utilities. Not now, Lauren, Carson hissed. Sheriff Morales, who had been watching silently, cleared his throat. Mr. Hayward Jr., I recommend that you accept the notice. It doesn't mean you agree to the eviction, just that you acknowledge receipt of the document. Carson snatched the paper from my hands. I'll fight this. I have rights. Of course, Terrence nodded. You can challenge the decision in court, but if I were you, I would consult with a lawyer first, because in this case, the law is on Mr. Hayward Sr.'s side. Dad. Carson suddenly changed tactics, his voice becoming almost pleading. Let's talk in private. Without all these officials, we're family, we can work this out as a family. I hesitated. Part of me still wanted to believe that we could fix things. But then I remembered his cry. You're going to pay me $2,500 a month. And I was determined. No, Carson. This is no longer a family matter. This is a matter of respect and consequences. I don't give a damn about your respect, he suddenly exploded. You spent my whole life teaching me to respect you, and what did you do? You disappeared on construction sites all day long. You missed my school events. And now that I've finally gotten what you owe me, you're trying to take it back. I stepped back, stunned by the force of his anger. Carson, Lorraine snapped. The children can hear you. Let them hear. He turned toward the stairs and shouted, Ashley, Bryce, come downstairs. Your grandfather is here to tell you he's kicking us out of our house. I heard hurried footsteps and the children appeared on the stairs. Their eyes were wide with fear. Dad, what's going on? Ashley asked in a trembling voice. Carson pointed at me with a shaking finger. Your grandfather has decided he can just come and take our house. That's what's happening. That's not true, I said to my grandchildren. This house has always been mine. I wanted to give it to your father, but legally it still belongs to me. And now he's using that technicality to throw us out on the street, Carson was almost shouting. After you demanded rent from me for living in my own house, I added, trying to remain calm for the children's sake. There was silence. Then Ashley slowly turned to her father. Did you really do that, Dad? Demand money from Grandpa? Carson stammered. It was fair. He lived here, ate our food. 18 days, I repeated. After his stroke. I saw something change in Ashley's eyes. At 12, she seemed to understand more than I had given her credit for. That's disgusting, Dad, she said quietly, turning to me. I'm sorry, Grandpa. She climbed back up the stairs, slamming her bedroom door behind her. Bryce looked uncertainly from his father to me, then ran upstairs as well. See what you've done? Carson hissed. You've turned my children against me. I shook my head. No, Carson, this is entirely your doing. Lauren, who had looked indignant until now now seemed more confused. 30 days. But where will we go? We paid off the mortgage on our apartment in the city center a long time ago. We sold it. That's not my problem, I said, surprised at my own harshness. Just like my problems after my stroke weren't your problem. Carson looked like he wanted to throw something. You can't do this. I'm your son. That's exactly why I'm giving you 30 days instead of kicking you out immediately, I replied. Although, given the circumstances, I have every right to do that. Mr. Hayward, Jr., Sheriff Morales interjected, I advise you to accept the situation and start looking for new housing. If you don't vacate the premises in 30 days, a forced eviction procedure will be initiated, and this could negatively affect your credit history. Carson crumpled the notice in his hand. I'll call my lawyer. We'll see who evicts whom. You're free to try, Terrence replied calmly. But I've checked all the documents. The house belongs to your father, and given the circumstances, the court will be on his side. Lauren suddenly burst into tears. 30 days. Where are we going to find a good house in 30 days? The kids' school is nearby, my job. I felt a pang of conscience, but quickly suppressed it. They hadn't thought about my convenience when they demanded the rent. Listen, I said, making one last attempt at mercy. If you vacate the house without a fight, I can help with the first month's rent on a new place. We won't take your money, Carson shouted. You owe us, not the other way around. I sighed. In that case, that's all we have. 30 days, Carson, not a day more. We turned to leave, but at that moment Carson grabbed my arm. Wait, there's something you should know now that we're severing all ties. Something in his voice made me stop. Remember how you stopped talking to Marielle after your mother died? His eyes flashed with anger. She tried to get in touch with you, many times. Letters, phone calls. I looked at him in confusion. What are you talking about? I didn't receive any letters from her. Of course you didn't, he smirked. I intercepted them. And the calls, too. I told her you didn't want to talk to her. I felt the blood drain from my face. You're lying. Why would I lie now? He shrugged. It was in my best interest that you didn't talk to her. That way I'd get all the inheritance. The sheriff and Terrence exchanged glances but said nothing. Lauren looked shocked. Carson, you couldn't have... Shut up, Lauren, he snapped, turning back to me. Do you know what was in those letters? She apologized. She explained that she couldn't come to the funeral because she had a miscarriage that day. She lost her baby, Dad, and you turned your back on her without even listening. I staggered, feeling the room spin. Terrence caught me by the arm. Garland, he's trying to manipulate you, he whispered. But I couldn't take my eyes off Carson's face. You kept those letters? Why? He laughed, but it was a cold laugh. I burned them. Every single one. I couldn't find the words. How could you, Carson? She's your sister. And you're my father, he retorted. And look what you're doing now. I took a deep breath, trying to control my emotions. There's a difference, Carson. I'm doing this because you showed me you don't respect me. You did it out of greed and envy. Lauren suddenly stepped forward. Garland, please. The children. We can't just move out like this. Carson was wrong to demand money from you, but don't punish us all for it. I looked at her face contorted with anxiety, and felt exhausted. 30 days, Lauren. That's more than you would have given me if I hadn't paid the rent. We left the house to the sound of Carson shouting about lawsuits and revenge. Sheriff Morales, satisfied that there was no physical threat, took his leave, promising to keep an eye on the situation. In the car, Terrence was silent for a long time, then asked, Do you think he was telling the truth? About Marielle? I stared out the window at the houses rushing by. I don't know. Maybe. Marielle was always proud, like me. If she called and Carson told her I didn't want to talk to her, she might have believed him. You could try to get in touch with her, Terrence suggested cautiously. I have friends in Portland who could find her contact information. I nodded, still staring out the window. Maybe. First, I need to finish moving out. You're sure you don't want to reconsider? Terrence asked. After what he said about Mariel? I turned to him. No. In fact, it only strengthened my resolve. If he really had been intercepting my sister's letters, that meant he had been manipulating me for years. It had to end. We drove to my house in silence. Terrence dropped me off and said before he left, "He's going to fight, Garland. Get ready for trouble." I nodded. I know, but I'm ready. The next few days were tense. Carson, as promised, hired a lawyer who began bombarding us with letters demanding money and threatening lawsuits. Terrence responded to everything with legal precision, and gradually the tone of the letters changed from aggressive to pleading. 2 weeks later, the phone rang. I picked up, expecting to hear more threats from Carson, but it was Lauren. "Garland," she said, sounding tired, "we found an apartment. We're moving out in 3 days." I was surprised. So soon? There's still almost 2 weeks left. "Carson doesn't know I'm calling," she continued. "He still thinks he can win in court, but his lawyer told him he doesn't stand a chance." "I see," I said, not knowing what else to say. "Garland," her voice faltered, "I want to apologize. I didn't know Carson was demanding so much money from you. He told me you had agreed on a small amount for utilities." I sighed. "Lauren, neither of you wanted me to live with you. That was obvious." "Yes," she didn't deny it. "But not like that. Not by demanding money from a sick man. I'm ashamed, Garland." I felt my throat tighten. "What about the kids?" "Ashley isn't talking to her father," Lauren replied. "Bryce is confused. They don't understand why adults can't settle things peacefully." "I don't understand either," I admitted honestly. After a short pause, Lauren said, "We'll have the house cleared out by Saturday. I'll leave the keys with the neighbors." "Thanks for calling," I said, pausing before adding, "Good luck, Lauren." "You too, Garland." She paused. "You know, I think you should call Mariel. Carson really was intercepting her letters. I saw one of them, but he told me you had read it and refused to reply." After that call, I sat in my chair for a long time, thinking. Maybe Carson had lied about everything, or just some things. How many more secrets had he kept all these years? On Saturday, I arrived at the house with Terrence. As Lauren had promised, the keys were with the neighbors, an elderly couple who had lived next door since I built the house. "They left early this morning," Mrs. Gonzalez said, handing me the keys. Mr. Hayward was very angry, shouting at the top of his voice, but Mrs. Hayward and the children were silent. I thanked her, and Terrence and I went inside. The house was empty, no furniture, no personal belongings, just trash scattered across the floor and a hole in the living room wall, as if someone had punched it. "Carson was always quick-tempered," I remarked, looking at the damage. "Even as a child." Terrence shook his head. "It's so strange to see the house empty. I remember when Myrna and I came here for barbecues when you first built it." I nodded, feeling a strange emptiness inside. The victory didn't bring the satisfaction I had hoped for, only fatigue and a slight sadness. We went through the whole house, checking to see if anything important had been left behind. In Ashley's room, I found a note taped to the wall. "Grandpa, I'm not mad at you. Dad was wrong. Call Aunt Mariel. Ashley." I folded the note and put it in my pocket. Another voice telling me to do what I had already been thinking. There was a surprise waiting for us in the kitchen, a stack of letters tied with ribbon on the table. On top was a note. "Garland, I found these in Carson's study. He didn't burn them like he said he would. Lorraine." I untied the ribbon. Letters from Mariel. Dozens of letters from the last 5 years. All unopened. "My God," Terrence whispered, looking at the dates on the envelopes. He really was intercepting them. I picked up the top letter, dated last month, and carefully opened it. Marielle's handwriting, so similar to Clarissa's, neat and clear. "Dear Dad," she wrote, This is my 27th letter in 5 years. I don't know if you read them, but I keep writing in the hope that one day you will reply. I miss you. My children miss their grandfather, whom they hardly knew. Please give me a chance to explain why I couldn't come to your mother's funeral. Please don't let our pride destroy what's left of our family. I couldn't read any further, tears blurring my vision. Terrence tactfully turned away, pretending to examine the kitchen cabinets. I need to call her, I said, wiping my eyes. Right now. Of course, Terrence nodded. I'll wait in the car. He left, leaving me alone with my sister's letters and the heavy realization of how much time we had lost because of Carson's lies. I sat down at the empty kitchen table and began reading the letters one by one, from the oldest to the newest. The story of 5 years of Marielle's life that I had missed, the birth of her third child, her older children's successes in school, her new job at an art gallery in Portland, and in every letter, a plea for forgiveness and hope for a reconciliation. When I finished reading, I knew what I had to do. I took out my phone and found Marielle's number in my old contacts. It might not work anymore, but I had to try. I pressed the call button, and with each ring, my heart beat faster. Suddenly, the ringing stopped, and I heard her voice, so similar to Clarissa's that it took my breath away. "Hello?" she said uncertainly. "Miriam," I said, struggling to contain my excitement. "It's Dad." There was a silence so deep that I could hear my heart beating. Then Marielle exhaled, as if she had been holding her breath the whole time. "Dad? Is that really you?" Her voice trembled. "Yes, sweetheart. It's me." The words came out with difficulty through my constricted throat. I found your letters. All of them. You, just now?" Her voice was a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Marielle Carson intercepted them. For years. I just found them in his house." I took a breath. "His former house. I evicted him." "What?" She was clearly stunned. "Dad, I don't understand. It's a long story," I sighed, looking around the empty kitchen. "But I want to tell you. I want to make things right, if you'll let me." "Of course," her voice softened. "I've waited so many years for this call, Dad." We talked for almost 2 hours. I told her everything, about my stroke, about moving to Carson, about his demand for rent, about eviction, and about the letters I found. She listened, sometimes interrupting me with questions, sometimes crying quietly. Then it was her turn. She told me about the miscarriage she had on Clarissa's funeral day, about how she had called me, but Carson said I refused to come to the phone. "I even flew to El Paso 2 years ago," she said. "I stood in front of your house, but I didn't dare call. Carson said you threatened to call the police if I showed up. I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Mariam, I swear, I never—" "I know, Dad," she interrupted. "I know now, and to be honest, I always had my doubts. You can be stubborn, but you've never been cruel." We agreed that she would fly to El Paso in a week. She had a few things to finish up in Portland, and I needed to sort out Carson's house. When I left the house, Terrence was still waiting for me in the car, leafing through some documents. "How did it go?" he asked when I got in. "She's flying in next week," I replied, still not believing that we had finally talked. "Terrence, we lost 5 years. 5 years because of Carson's lies." Terrence put his hand on my shoulder. "But now you have a future. That's what matters." On the way home, we discussed what to do with Carson's house. I decided to sell it. Too many negative memories were associated with it now. "It'll need some repairs," I said, remembering the hole in the wall and the scattered trash. "And we'll need to find a good real estate agent." Terrence nodded. "My niece Daisy works at a real estate agency. She's energetic and honest. I can introduce you." The next day, Daisy Wickham, a petite blonde in her 30s with the energy of a small tornado, was inspecting the house, taking notes on her tablet. "Great location, Mr. Hayward," she said when she finished. "There's a good school nearby and a park within walking distance. The house needs some cosmetic work, but structurally it's fine. I think we can list it for a good price. I'd like to sell it as soon as possible, I said. Even if I have to lower the price a little? Daisy tapped her chin thoughtfully. I understand, but there's no need to rush too much. With your permission, I'll arrange for some minor repairs, painting the walls, replacing the cracked tiles in the bathroom, fixing that hole in the living room. It won't take long, but it will make the house much more attractive. I agreed, and the next few days were spent in a flurry of renovation work. Daisy coordinated the process, and I came by to check on the progress and offer advice. Despite my stroke, my experience as a builder was still useful. The work helped distract me from thinking about my upcoming meeting with Marielle. I was both looking forward to her arrival and dreading it. What if she still held a grudge when we met in person? What if we had grown too different over the years? On Wednesday, when the major work on the house was almost finished, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Hayward?" a woman's voice said. "This is Ashley, your granddaughter." I was surprised. "Ashley? How did you—" "I found your number in my mom's old phone," she said quickly. "She doesn't know I'm calling, neither does Dad. Is everything okay? I'm worried. Did something happen?" "No," she paused. "I just wanted to say that I'm not angry with you. About the house. I heard Dad demanding money from you, and it was wrong." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Thank you, Ashley. That means a lot to me. And also," she lowered her voice, "Dad's really angry. He says he's going to sue you, that the house is really his, that you broke your promise." I sighed. "I'm afraid that's not true. The house has always been mine." "I know," she replied unexpectedly. "I found the papers in his desk when we were packing. There was a folder labeled gift tax. He just didn't want to pay, did he?" 12 years old and so perceptive. "Yes, Ashley. He didn't complete the gifting process." "I see," she said, pausing. "Grandpa, I want you to know that I'll miss that house. But I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at Dad." After that conversation, I sat for a long time staring out the window. Carson had not only destroyed our relationship, but he had also undermined the trust of his own children. What was the point? The next day, Daisy announced that the house was ready to be shown, and we officially put it up for sale. She took professional photos, wrote an appealing description, and posted the listing on all the major platforms. "You'll see, Mr. Hayward," she smiled, showing me the finished listing on her tablet. "With the location and condition of the house, we'll get offers very quickly." She was right. The very next day, calls started coming in from potential buyers wanting to see the house. Daisy took care of the showings, and I tried not to think about selling the house I had built for my son. On Saturday morning, I drove to the airport to meet Marielle. Waiting in the arrivals area, I was as nervous as a teenager before his first date. What would she look like now? Would I recognize her? Would she recognize me, older and weakened by a stroke? When she came out of the arrivals area, I saw her right away. She looked so much like Clarissa that it took my breath away. The same chestnut hair, the same attentive brown eyes. She stopped, looking around, and I raised my hand. Our eyes met, and time seemed to stand still. Then she ran toward me, dropping her suitcase, and hugged me tightly. "Dad," she sobbed into my shoulder, "I missed you so much." I hugged her, feeling tears rolling down my cheeks. "Me too, baby. Me too." We stood there in the middle of the airport, oblivious to the people passing by. 5 years of separation melted away in that embrace. Later, over lunch at my house, we talked about everything that had happened over the years. Marielle told me about her children, my grandchildren, whom I had only seen in photographs in her letters, about her job at an art gallery, about the new house she and her husband Neil had bought in the suburbs of Portland. "Dad," she said as we drank coffee after lunch, "I want you to come visit us. Meet your grandchildren. They've heard so much about you." I smiled. "I'd love to." But first I have to finish up here. Sell Carson's house. Decide what to do with this house. Marielle frowned. Are you really going to sell that house? Wouldn't it be better to keep it, rent it out? I shook my head. No, there are too many bad memories tied up in it now. I want to close that chapter. What about this house? She looked around the living room where we were sitting. Are you going to sell it too? I thought about it. This house was full of memories of Clarissa, but not all of them were painful. We had been happy here for most of our life together. I don't know, I replied honestly. Part of me wants to start with a clean slate, maybe move closer to you and your family, but another part doesn't want to let go of the last place where I feel your mother's presence. Marielle nodded understandingly. Time will tell, Dad. Don't rush into a decision. The next day, I showed her Carson's house, which was already prepared for sale. She walked silently through the empty rooms, touching the walls I had once built with my own hands. You know, I remember when you built this house, she said, standing by the window in the living room. I was 12. I would come home after school and watch you work. You always found a little job for me to do, so I would feel like I was part of the process. I smiled, remembering how she would help me measure boards or hand me tools with a serious look on her face. You were a good helper. Carson never came, she continued, turning to me. Even then, he wasn't interested in what you were doing for him. I sighed. Maybe that was my mistake. I kept giving without asking for anything in return, not even a thank you. Marielle came over and took my hand. That's not a mistake, Dad. That's love. Carson's mistake was not realizing its value. On Monday morning, as Marielle and I were having breakfast, the phone rang. It was Daisy, sounding excited. Mr. Hayward, we have an offer, she exclaimed. The River family looked at the house yesterday and made a formal offer this morning. The full asking price, no haggling. I was surprised by such a quick response. That's wonderful, Daisy. What's the next step? I'll email you all the details. If you agree to the terms, we can start the process of finalizing the deal. The family wants to move in as soon as possible and they're ready to close quickly. After the call, I told Marielle about the offer. She looked thoughtful. So soon, she said. Are you sure you want to sell? Yes, I nodded. The sooner this is over, the better. We were discussing the details when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I saw a young man in a suit holding a folder of documents. Mr. Garland Hayward? He asked in a formal tone. I represent the law firm of Burns and Partners. Mr. Carson Hayward has hired us to settle a matter concerning real estate. I sighed. Come in. Miriam tensed as the lawyer sat down at our kitchen table and took out the documents. Mr. Hayward, my client believes that despite the lack of formal completion of the gift, the house was in fact transferred to him. He has invested significant funds in repairs and maintenance of the property and has paid property taxes and utilities for 6 years. I listened patiently, knowing this was just an attempt to pressure us. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, Mr. Hayward Jr. believes that your eviction actions were unnecessarily harsh and caused him and his family significant emotional and financial damage. What are you getting at? I asked bluntly. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Hayward Jr. is willing to waive his claim to the house on the condition that you pay him compensation equal to 50% of the market value of the property, as well as reimbursement for moving expenses and the cost of renting a new home. Marielle let out a skeptical laugh. That's ridiculous. The lawyer looked at her with slight irritation. Excuse me, but who are you? I'm Marielle Hayward, Mr. Hayward's daughter and your client's sister, she replied. And as far as I know, my brother intercepted my letters to my father for years, demanded rent from him for living in his own home after his stroke, and manipulated him for the sake of his inheritance. I think if anyone should be talking about moral damages, it's my father. The lawyer looked somewhat taken aback. I wasn't informed of those details. Of course you weren't, I nodded. Carson was always selective with the facts. Look, young man, I understand you're just doing your job, but the house legally belongs to me. Your client never completed the gifting process to avoid paying taxes. That was his choice, and now he has to live with the consequences. The lawyer awkwardly adjusted his tie. Nevertheless, Mr. Hayward, the court may take into consideration the verbal agreement and actual possession of the property for a long period of time, which was interrupted by a demand for rent from his own father who had suffered a stroke, Marielle finished for him. I doubt that will make a good impression on the judge. The lawyer paused, clearly reconsidering his strategy. In that case, perhaps we could discuss a more modest compensation. For the money invested in the house? I shook my head. No. Carson lived in that house rent-free for 6 years. Consider that compensation for the rent he would have had to pay somewhere else. Besides, Marielle added, the house is already listed for sale, and there's a buyer. The lawyer looked surprised. You're already selling the house? Yes, I confirmed, and we've received an offer for the full asking price. The lawyer gathered his papers, realizing his position was weak. I'll let my client know. We may come back with another offer. After he left, Marielle laughed. Carson has always been pushy, but this is beyond anything I expected. He won't stop, I sighed. At least not until the house is sold and the money is out of his reach. Miriam squeezed my hand. Then let's speed up the process. Call Daisy and tell her you're accepting the offer. I did as she said. Daisy was delighted and promised to start the paperwork immediately. She warned that the process would still take several weeks, but we could start right away. That same day, Carson called me himself. His voice sounded strained with poorly concealed anger. "Dad, are you really selling the house?" he asked, without greeting me. "Yes, Carson," I replied calmly. "I already have a buyer." "You can't do that," he almost shouted. "That house is mine. You promised." "I was going to give it to you, that's true," I agreed. "But you never completed the gift deed, and then you demanded rent from me for living there. That changed the situation." "It was just a little disagreement." His voice became almost pleading. "You can't ruin my life because of one mistake." "Carson," I tried to speak gently, "you've been ruining my life for years. You intercepted Marielle's letters, lied to both of us, manipulated me for the sake of your inheritance. That's not a mistake. It's a way of life." There was a silence, and then he changed tactics. "Miriam is there, isn't she? She was always your favorite. She always got everything she wanted." "Carson," I felt tired. "I loved you both equally. You just always wanted more than you could give." "I deserve this house," he shouted again. "I'm your son." "Yes, you're my son," I agreed, "and I will always love you, but I won't let you use that love against me anymore." I ended the conversation feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Carson would never change, but I could change my reaction to his behavior. The next 2 weeks were spent finalizing the sale of the house. The Riveras turned out to be nice people, a young couple with 2 children who had moved to El Paso from San Antonio. They had fallen in love with the house at first sight and were eager to move in. Carson made several more attempts to block the sale. His lawyer sent a formal letter demanding that the process be halted. Then he tried to convince Ashley to call me and ask me not to sell the house for the sake of her future. Finally, he showed up at my door late one night, drunk and aggressive, demanding justice. Terrence, who was visiting me with Myrna, called the sheriff and Carson was taken away, threatening lawsuits and eternal hatred. "He'll never forgive me," I said to Marielle after the incident. She shook her head. "It's not about forgiveness, Dad. Carson never thought he did anything that required forgiveness. In his world, he's always the victim, and everyone else owes him something." Finally, on Friday, exactly 3 weeks after Carson was evicted, we closed the deal. I signed the last documents at the notary's office, shook hands with the Rivera family, and handed them the keys to the house. "I hope you'll be happy here," I said sincerely to Maria Rivera, a young woman with kind eyes. "This house deserves a happy family." The money from the sale was transferred to my account, a substantial amount that would provide me with a comfortable life for many years to come. I decided to set aside some of the money for my grandchildren, both Marielle's children and Carson's, regardless of their father's behavior. That evening, Marielle, Terrence, and Myrna celebrated the completion of the deal with a quiet dinner at my house. Marielle prepared Clarissa's favorite dish, a family recipe for roast, and for a moment I felt as if time had turned back and we were once again the happy family we had once been. "To new beginnings," Terrence said, raising his glass, "and to old friendships." We drank, and I looked at my daughter, my friends, my house, which suddenly felt cozy and full of life again. "You know," I said, "I don't think I'm going to sell this house after all. At least not for now. Maybe I'll come here in the winter when it's too cold and damp in Portland." Marielle smiled. "So you've decided to move in with me after all?" I nodded. "I want to get to know my grandchildren, make up for lost time." "But you'll come back," she said, not as a question but as a statement. "Yes," I said, looking around the room filled with memories of Clarissa. "Part of me will always be here." After dinner, when Terrence and Myrna had left and Marielle insisted that I rest while she did the dishes, I sat down in Clarissa's chair by the window. The sun was setting, painting the El Paso sky shades of pink and gold. I thought about the past weeks, the decisions I had made, the road that had led me here. Carson was still my son, and part of me would always love him. But I finally understood that love did not have to mean blind obedience or allowing oneself to be used. Selling the house wasn't revenge. It was an act of self-respect. Not the end, but a new beginning. At 74, I suddenly discovered that I still had a future. With my daughter, my grandchildren, my friends. A life worth living to the fullest. Marielle came over and sat down next to me, handing me a cup of tea. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" she asked softly. I smiled at her. "About tomorrow, and about how it's never too late to start over." Morning light flooded my new kitchen, dancing across the light wood surfaces and reflecting off the chrome cabinet handles. I sat at the table, sipping my coffee and reading the morning paper. 6 months had passed since I sold Carson's house and started a new chapter in my life. After selling the house, I didn't immediately move to Portland to be with Marielle, as I had originally planned. Instead, I spent 3 weeks with her and her family, getting to know her son-in-law Neil and her grandchildren, 16-year-old Haley, 14-year-old Ethan, and 9-year-old Zoe. They welcomed me with such warmth that for the first time in many years, I felt like I was truly part of a family. But El Paso was pulling me back. My friends were here, my memories, my history. And although I promised Marielle that I would visit Portland regularly, and kept that promise by visiting them for Thanksgiving and Christmas, I decided to stay in the city that had been my home for over 40 years. I sold my old house, full of memories of Clarissa, to a young couple with a small child. It was painful to say goodbye to a place where we had been so happy, but I knew that clinging to the past meant giving up on the future. Clarissa would never have approved. With the money from the sale of the 2 houses, I bought a small but comfortable 1-story house in the Sunnyland Park neighborhood, a quiet corner of El Paso with wide streets and mature trees. It was much smaller than my previous home, but it was perfect for one person. Most importantly, it had no stairs, which was important after my stroke. The house needed repairs, and that gave me a goal, a project I could immerse myself in. Despite the effects of the stroke, my left arm still didn't fully obey me. I was able to do most of the work myself. My friends from the veteran builders community helped me with the things I couldn't do. This community has become an important part of my new life. Terrence, upon learning of my return to El Paso, introduced me to a group of former builders, engineers, and architects who met twice a week at a local cafe called Rosie's. Most of them were in their 60s, and they all shared my love of creation and working with my hands. Through them, I learned about the Builders of Hope program, which helped low-income families repair their homes. Despite my age and the effects of my stroke, I was able to advise young volunteers and share my experience with them. For the first time in a long time, I felt needed and useful. I took a sip of coffee and turned the page of the newspaper. Today was a typical Thursday for the program. In the morning, a meeting with the group at Rosie's Cafe, then a trip to the Builders of Hope site, where we helped a single mother of 4 repair her leaky roof. In the evening, I was scheduled to call Marielle, our weekly tradition. Life had found a rhythm, calm and satisfying. I no longer felt like a useless old man as I had at Carson's house. I tried not to think about Carson. After the house was sold, he sent me several angry letters. Then there was silence. From Ashley, who sometimes called me in secret, I knew that she, Lauren, and the children had rented an apartment in another part of town. Carson was still angry and often spoke of betrayal and theft, but gradually he seemed to come to terms with the situation. I finished breakfast, washed the dishes, and headed to the garage, which I had converted into a small workshop. Here I worked on my new hobby, making miniature furniture for dollhouses. The idea came from my granddaughter Zoe, who was delighted with the dollhouse she had received for Christmas. I promised to make her some tiny furniture, and now, every month I send her a new piece, a chair, a table, a bed, a wardrobe. This activity required patience and precision, but it brought me incredible satisfaction. Today I worked on a small chest of drawers. I had already finished the base and was now carving the tiny handles. The work was progressing slowly. The effects of the stroke were still making themselves felt, but I was in no hurry. At 10 o'clock, I left work, got changed, and drove to Rosie's Cafe. My old pickup truck, which had served me faithfully for over 20 years, was still running, although Marielle insisted that I buy a new car. Familiar faces had already gathered at the cafe. Frank Dawson, a former foreman with whom we had once worked on the construction of the Rio Grande Bridge, Jorge Ramirez, a retired architect, Bill Matthews, an electrician who could tell the story of every significant building in El Paso, and of course, Terrence, who, despite being 76, still consulted on real estate legal matters. "Garland!" Frank waved me over, pointing to an empty chair at their table. "We've already started discussing today's project. The Martinez roof is in worse shape than we thought." I sat down, nodding to Rosie, the cafe owner, who immediately brought me a cup of coffee. Black, no sugar, just the way I liked it. "What's wrong with it?" I asked, sipping the hot drink. "The rafters are rotten," Jorge replied, unfolding a drawing on the table. "We thought replacing a few tiles would be enough, but we'll have to dismantle the entire structure." We delved deeper into the discussion, recalling similar cases from our practice and offering solutions. Such conversations always took me back to the past, when work was the center of my life and problems were solved simply with nails, boards, and hard work. After the cafe, we drove to the site, a small, dilapidated house on the outskirts of town. Lucia Martinez, a young woman with tired eyes and a warm smile, greeted us at the door, holding her youngest child in her arms. "God bless you all," she said, letting us in. "I don't know what I would do without your help." The house was small and old, but clean and well kept, with photos of children on the walls, homemade curtains on the windows, and pots of flowers on the windowsills. Lucia had done everything she could to create a cozy home for her children. Jorge and I inspected the attic, confirming his fears. The rafters really did need replacing. That meant more work, more materials, more money. But when we told Lucia, she just nodded, her lips pressed together. "I can take extra shifts at the hospital," she said. "How much money do you need?" "None," I replied, exchanging glances with the others. "The program will cover the costs, and will help with the work." Her eyes filled with tears. "I can't accept that much." You can, Frank said firmly. That's what the program is for. We spent the entire day developing a work plan and calculating the necessary materials. The young volunteers who joined us after lunch listened to our advice with respect. I explained to them how to properly dismantle the old structure without damaging the healthy parts of the roof, while Bill talked about how to safely disconnect the electrical wiring. I returned home, tired but satisfied. I took a shower, heated up the dinner I had prepared the day before. Miriam had taught me to plan meals for several days in advance, and settled into my favorite chair with a book, waiting for my daughter to call. At exactly 7 o'clock, the phone rang. I turned on the speakerphone so I could see Marielle and the family on the screen. "Dad!" My daughter's face lit up with a smile. "How are you?" "Great," I said, showing her my paint-stained hands. "Today we plan to repair the roof for the Martinez family, and I'm almost done with the dresser for Zoe." "Grandpa!" My youngest granddaughter's face appeared on the screen. "I can't wait! Emily's dolls need a place to store their dresses." I laughed. "It'll be ready by next week, I promise." We talked for almost an hour. Haley told us about her successes in the school orchestra. Ethan bragged about winning the science fair, and Zoe showed us her new drawing. Neil, Marielle's husband, stopped by briefly to say hello and ask about my health. We were getting closer with every conversation. "You look happy, Dad," Marielle said when the kids left. "El Paso suits you." "Yes," I said, looking around my new home, furnished to my taste, with photos of Clarissa, the children and grandchildren on the walls. "I feel at home here." "Are you still planning to come for spring break?" she asked. "The kids are already making a list of places they want to take you." "Of course," I smiled. "I already bought my ticket." After our conversation, I sat for a while, watching the sky darken outside the window. Who would have thought that at 74, my life could change so much, that I would feel needed, useful, happy? Of course, not everything was perfect. Sometimes I was tormented by joint pain at night. Sometimes I woke up looking for Clarissa and relived the loss when I realized she wasn't there. Sometimes I thought about Carson, about how things could have turned out differently. But overall, I was grateful for what I had, for my new connection with Marielle and her family, for the friends who supported me, for the opportunity to help others and feel useful. A few days later, as I was busy in the garden planting the spring flowers Clarissa had loved so much, my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, a 60-year-old Indian woman who lived across the street, came over. "Mr. Hayward," she said, handing me a container of something fragrant. "I made some curry and thought you might like to try it." I gratefully accepted the offer. Since moving to the neighborhood, I had tried to be a good neighbor, helping with odd jobs, sharing tools, and keeping an eye on people's houses when they were away. My neighbors reciprocated. "Thank you, Mrs. Patel. That's very kind of you." She smiled as she looked at my seedlings. "Beautiful flowers. Did your wife love them?" "Yes," I nodded, not surprised that she knew about Clarissa. News travels fast in neighborhoods like this. "They were her favorites," Mrs. Patel nodded understandingly. "My husband died 3 years ago. Every day I cook his favorite dishes. That way, he stays with me." I looked at her with new interest. "Are you a widow too?" "Yes," she said, adjusting the edge of her colorful sari. "Rajiv was a good man, a doctor. We moved here from Mumbai 30 years ago." She paused. "Sometimes I think about going back to India, but this is my home now, and my children are in America." We got talking. It turned out we had a lot in common, not only the loss of our spouses, but also a love of gardening, classical music, and old movies. She invited me over for tea the next day, and I accepted. So another person came into my life with whom I could share my days. Not a romantic relationship. The wound from losing Clarissa was still too fresh for that, but a friendship based on mutual respect and shared interests. About a week after that, while I was working with the crew on the Martinez's roof, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. "Dad?" Carson's voice sounded different than I remembered, less confident, almost uncertain. I stepped away from the noisy group of workers. Yes, Carson. I... He cleared his throat. I wanted to see how you were doing. Fine, I replied cautiously. And you? Fine, I paused. We moved into a new apartment, closer to the kids' school. That's good, I said, not knowing what else to say. Dad, his voice grew quieter. I've been thinking about what happened, about the eviction, about the house. I waited for him to continue. I was wrong to ask you for rent, he finally said. It was uncalled for. I was surprised by this admission. Thank you, Carson. That means a lot to me. And also, he took a deep breath, I wanted to ask, you sold the house for a good price, right? Ah, there it is. I felt a familiar disappointment. Yes, Carson, for market value. And you didn't think that maybe some of that money... I mean, I put 6 years of my life into that house, fixed it up, paid taxes. Carson, I interrupted gently, you lived in that house rent-free all these years. Consider it compensation for the rent you would have had to pay somewhere else. But that's not fair. His voice became angry again. You promised me that house, and you could have had it if you had completed the gift deed, I replied calmly. It was your choice not to do so. Because of the tax, you knew I couldn't afford to pay that tax. Then you could have been honest about that and we would have found a solution, I sighed. Instead, you just ignored the problem and then tried to charge me rent for my own house. There was a silence, and then Carson said what I was afraid to hear. I need money, Dad. We're in trouble. Lauren got laid off and the rent on our apartment is more than we expected. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to help. He was my son, my boy, after all. But another part remembered all the manipulation, the lies, the letters I'd intercepted from Marielle. Carson, I finally said, I can't give you money from the sale of the house, but I can help you find a job. I have connections in the construction industry. I don't need your charity, he interrupted. I need what is rightfully mine. Nothing is rightfully yours, Carson. My voice became firm. Everything you have to earn yourself, just like the rest of us. I knew it, he almost hissed. You never loved me the way you loved Marielle. She was always your favorite. That's not true, Carson, and you know it, I said, tired of this old argument. I loved you both the same. She just didn't try to use that love against me. Get out of here, he spat and hung up. I stood there, holding the phone, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Carson hadn't changed, and he probably never would. When I returned to the group, Terrence looked at me with concern. Are you okay? You look upset. Carson called, I replied, picking up a hammer. He wanted money. Terrence shook his head. And you refused? Yes, I began hammering a nail, feeling the work help me cope with my emotions. He'll never learn if I keep bailing him out. That's right. Terrence squeezed my shoulder. You did what you had to do. That evening, when I got home, I sat on the back porch for a long time, looking at my little garden. My conversation with Carson had stirred up old doubts. Maybe I was being too hard on him. Maybe I should give him another chance. But then I remembered the last 6 months. A new home, new friends, a restored relationship with Marielle and her family. My job with Builders of Hope, which gave me purpose and a sense of fulfillment. My hobby, which made my granddaughter happy. All of this was only possible because I had finally learned to respect myself. I had learned to say no when necessary. I had learned not to let others, even my own children, use my love against me. I took out my phone and dialed Mary's number. Dad? Her voice sounded surprised. Is something wrong? We talked yesterday. Everything's fine, sweetheart, I said, feeling the words I wanted to say fill me with warmth. I just wanted to say that I love you, and I'm grateful that you came back into my life. Oh, Dad, I heard the smile in her voice. I love you too, and I'm so glad we're together again. After the call, I looked at the setting sun painting the El Paso sky shades of pink and gold. Life doesn't always turn out the way we plan. Sometimes it teaches us bitter lessons, forcing us to lose what we thought was an integral part of ourselves. But sometimes, if we are brave enough to let go of the past and open ourselves up to new experiences, it gives us a second chance. A chance to start over, even at 74. A chance to find joy, purpose, and meaning where we least expected to find them. I got up from the porch and went back inside. Tomorrow will be a new day, and I will meet it with an open heart, ready for whatever it brings.